Hey everyone, so Zunesha is very likely the ancient weapon Pluton that has eaten a mythical zone fruit. That is a popular theory that is going around right now, that Zunesha might in fact be the centuries-old ancient weapon from the ancient kingdom, the great battleship Pluton, that has simply eaten a mythical zone fruit, presumably some sort of mythical elephant zone, to transform it into what we know of today as Zo. Shoutouts to Benny Uzuma on Twitter, who was the first person that I personally saw saying this. So it's not my own initial idea, however, the more and more that I have thought about it, the more and more evidence keeps lining up, like an absurd number of things that suggest that this very well could be the case. Zunesha could just be Pluton in zone form. So I've actually got a surprising amount of evidence to share with you all today. And before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece videos every week. Now, before we can talk about Zunesha today, we need to first talk about two arcs, Alabasta and Enies Lobby. I think many people have recognized that Wano has strong parallels to both those storylines, and features many callbacks to both those storylines. Alabasta was the first time taking down a Shichibukai, a long-running mission that started from the first time the Straw Hats entered the Grand Line. Wano is the first time taking down a Yonko, a long-running mission that started from the first time the Straw Hats entered the New World. The Straw Hats were roped in as outside allies to escort the royalty of Alabasta back to her country and help her in the conflict there. The Straw Hats were roped in as outside allies to escort the royalty of Wano back to his country and help him in the conflict there. Both times, a large-scale war, specifically a rebellion, was a centerpiece of the conflict. In Enies Lobby, the main enemies were Zoans. In Wano, all the enemies are Zoans. We see the same power-ups that were first introduced and debuted in Enies Lobby, finally being addressed, explained, and upgraded once again in Wano. We have CP9 trying to capture Robin, we have CP0 trying to capture Robin, we have traitors and hidden identities, even the Orochi-Kaido relationship was reminiscent of Spandam Lucci. Just in general, we have a lot of simple callbacks to both Alabasta and Enies Lobby, and I mean like really specific moments. Even just thematically, Alabasta, Enies Lobby, and Wano are the three arcs in One Piece that focus on leadership, with a bit of progression in each. Alabasta being heavy emphasis on Vivi as our first real model for what a great leader, a great queen is like, and Luffy actually getting to learn from seeing her leadership in action. Then Enies Lobby was the storyline of Luffy now having to finally come into his own as a leader, with heavy emphasis on his growth as a captain. And now finally Wano is the arc where we've come full circle, and it's a reverse of Alabasta where we started, with now it's Luffy being the established great leader, and Momonosuke the young royal who is trying to learn from watching him. And so naturally Wano is the arc that centers around Conqueror's Haki and the disposition of a king, of a leader, for that reason. So there is that continuing thematic train between those three arcs, Alabasta, Enies Lobby, and Wano as well. That's why the parallels of similar story elements and deliberate callbacks are not a mistake. A leads to B leads to C. That's how I've always looked at the connection between Alabasta, Enies Lobby, and Wano. Remember that relationship between that trio. Now, so when I first saw the idea that Zunesha is Pluton, I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then I remembered this Ohara tweet I saw where he brought up Funkfried, the sword that ate an elephant fruit in Enies Lobby. And then the more I thought about it, things just started to connect bit after bit after bit. So hear me out, I think this is interesting. So first, Pluton itself. Pluton has been a prominent plot point in only two arcs prior to Wano, and interestingly, those arcs are Alabasta and Enies Lobby. In Alabasta, Crocodile's goal was to resurrect Pluton. In Enies Lobby, the world government's goal was to resurrect Pluton. Those were the driving goals of the villains in both of those arcs, to get their hands on Pluton. In Wano, once again, Kaido and Big Mom's primary goal is to get the ancient weapons. Now we don't know which one first just yet, but is it possible that the elusive Pluton, the key missing piece from both Alabasta and Enies Lobby, just showed up on their doorstep? Second trend is the idea of weapons eating devil fruits. Before Wano, there were only two arcs where we were shown weapons that had eaten devil fruits. First was Alabasta, where we found out that a gun, a weapon, could eat a devil fruit. Then was Enies Lobby, where we got a sword that had eaten a devil fruit, specifically an elephant fruit. And now we're in Wano, and Zunesha just showed up, the product of some devil fruit whose name has been hidden, begging the question, what is Zunesha actually? Is it also some inanimate object that has eaten a devil fruit? Now, if we imagine that the three arcs of Alabasta, Enislabi, and Wano make up a sort of set, it's possible that the first two arcs are building up the mystery of the ancient weapon Pluton, with Pluton being a heavy focus throughout both of those plotlines. And then the third arc, Wano, is finally its reveal. So if the final reveal to where is Pluton is that Pluton has eaten a mythical zone and turned into a giant mythical elephant, then let's backtrack to setting up that reveal. In the first arc, Alabasta, Oda established that weapons can eat devil fruits. Then, in the second arc, Enislabi, Oda foreshadowed the truth by showing us a weapon that has specifically eaten an elephant fruit. And then finally, in the third arc, Oda gives us the truth, that Pluton is a weapon that has eaten a mythical elephant fruit. I personally think that would be a very nice progression of ideas and hints. Now, here's a few more pieces that I think fall into place. So first of all, something that I see people saying that I looked up and realized is actually incorrect is that, well, Zunesha cannot be Pluton because Zunesha is supposedly 1,000 years old. If Zunesha is 1,000 years old, then this doesn't make any sense, right? Because why would Pluton have been fed a mythical zone fruit and been made to walk the ocean, even before the ancient war and the void century and all that stuff? Well, here's the thing. Actually, Zunesha is never said to be 1,000 years old. That's an exaggeration made by Luffy. What is actually said is that Zunesha is nearly 1,000 years old. Now, the void century was the period between 800 and 900 years ago. If Zunesha is not 1,000 years old, but rather close to 1,000 years old, then suddenly the void century is a suspiciously viable period for the birth of Zunesha. So think about it. We know that there has long been a bond between the Minks and the Kazukis, and there must have been a strong bond between the Kazukis and the D tribe, as the Kazukis are the ones who created the poneglyphs that the D tribe, littered the world with. In fact, there are some amazing theories out there about just how tight the relationship between the Kazukis and the D tribe, and really the ancient kingdom and Wano are. Some have actually argued that they're one and the same, but that is not for me to talk about here. There are some existing great theories on that which aren't really relevant here. All I'll say is that at least we know that the D tribe and the Kazukis are very tight, and at least we know that the Minks and the Kazukis are very tight. So whatever was going on back in that ancient war, back during the Void Century, if we assume that the Minks were likely on the ancient kingdom's side by association, then perhaps as things were falling apart and Pluton needed to be hidden, it was fed the mythical elephant zone and commanded to walk the seas, with the Mink tribe escaping onto it as a safe haven. However, the big question then is who specifically fed Pluton the devil fruit, and who ordered it to walk, and why was it atoning for a crime? After all, this is punishment for a crime of some sort. So to start with, there is potential here for even more of past arcs messaging to come into play, considering what was one of the absolute biggest themes of Enislabi. The idea was pushed that even existence is a crime. That was a heavy theme of Enislabi, that the mere existence of something could be considered a crime. This harsh view was applied, interestingly, to both weapons and to individuals. The mere existence of Frankie's battleships as weapons, the mere existence of Nico Robin representing the potential to resurrect weapons. It doesn't matter if it's a battleship or if it's a living being. If it's dangerous enough, then just its existence can be condemned as a crime. And interestingly, Pluton, Zunesha, is both a battleship and a living being. We know Zunesha is being punished for some crime, but what does that actually mean? What did it do that was so terrible? Was this point that something's existence, be that an individual or a weapon, but simply something's existence could be considered a crime, was that point played up so much in Enislabi, partly because in the future, it would be revealed that Pluton itself was sentenced to walk the seas forever as punishment for the crime of existing. I think that's a really interesting possibility. Now, this does complicate things a lot, as that notion of existence being a crime, that does sound a lot more like a world government ideology, but it doesn't make that much sense for the world government to have been the ones who turned Pluton into an elephant and sent it off to walk forever as punishment, because wouldn't they have wanted to keep that power for themselves, as we see in Enislabi? Though, also as we see in chapter 1037, there does strangely appear to be some discrepancies in decision-making between the world government of today and the world government of the past. So maybe back then they had different ideas of what to do with Pluton than they do now. Maybe, but then at the same time, how would the minks have been able to, conveniently get onto Zunesha and roam around the seas if Pluton was first captured and in the hands of the world government? So here's an alternate theory where a few more things fall into place, but only if we really want to get speculative. So treat this next little segment as really just very hypothetical. I still think all the previous reasoning to Zunesha being Pluton does apply even without this next segment. This is just an extra effort to use this to maybe unravel some events of the Void Century, because some more things do fall into place. Looking first at Frankie's backstory and the significance of weapons, particularly battleships there, we got themes of responsibility of the creator, weapons being misused, atoning for crimes, etc., with the plot being that Frankie's weapons were misused to frame Tom. So maybe back during the Void Century, Pluton, as a weapon of the Ancient Kingdom, was used by some other enemy to frame them, to frame the Ancient Kingdom. After all, as far as we know, the Ancient Kingdom was likely good, so then why did the rest of the world band against them? Well, the Ancient Kingdom likely needed to be framed by some true enemy for committing some evil act that they actually would not do. The Ancient Kingdom was likely framed by this other enemy in order to get the other kingdoms to decide that the Ancient Kingdom needed to be defeated. That's a notion I've talked about in previous analysis videos multiple times, as Oda's absolute favorite way to craft storylines where bad guys cause rebellions to overthrow good ruling forces is by having the bad guys frame the good guys as evil, framing them for some evil act which they did not commit, to turn everyone else against them. You can learn more about that in depth in my Dressrosa analysis in particular, link on the top right. But anyway, if we were to tie that back in with the story of Pluton, perhaps foreshadowed by the story of Tom and Frankie's battleships, then the great battleship Pluton was perhaps secretly misused by some enemy of the Ancient Kingdom to frame the Ancient Kingdom, which may very well have been the trigger for all those other kingdoms banding together against the Ancient Kingdom. Which leads us back to Zuneshas Punishment. If, after the leaders of the Ancient Kingdom saw the damage that Pluton had done outside of their control, then going back to the ideas foreshadowed in the story of Frankie and Tom, the idea that even if weapons and battleships were never intended to be used for a certain purpose, they still end up being used for terrible things, then perhaps it was determined by the Ancient Kingdom that their own weapon, Pluton's existence, was wrong, considering it could be misused in this way. That's not necessarily the correct thinking. As we are taught in the modern day, you should not blame it on the existence of the weapon itself. But you could imagine why the Ancient Kingdom may have thought the way they did at that time. And so, not wanting Pluton to cause any more destruction after its misuse, perhaps even with the advent of a great war against the other kingdoms, the Ancient Kingdom decided to hide Pluton and to send it away so that no one could ever uncover it. And they did so by feeding it a mythical zoan that transformed it into something unrecognizable, and they commanded it to walk the seas forever, as its very existence was now looked at by themselves and by the world as a crime. The minks were perhaps meant to be the guardians or maybe the shepherds of this weapon. It makes a lot of sense, as the only way to ever find Zunesha, to find Pluton, is if you have a vivre card of the minks. Otherwise, it's simply untrackable, which means that you had to be a friend of the minks to be able to locate Zunesha. So essentially a friend of the Kazukis, a friend of the D-Tribe. Kind of like the concept of a secret keeper from Harry Potter, if you remember that. And as we progress through the series, it makes more and more sense why the ancient weapons are not just easily found. The world government couldn't just find Poseidon, as Poseidon is an individual that needed to be born. The world government couldn't just find Pluton, as it's not buried anywhere. It's been transformed into a living being that travels the seas, a being that literally cannot be found without a vivre card. Uranus, God knows where that is. For all we know, it's already in the hands of the world government, which may be why its location hasn't been hinted at in other poneglyphs that we've seen, as there's perhaps no story reason for Oda to leave breadcrumbs for Uranus's location, as it's just not something that the Straw Hats themselves are ever going to find. Just a possibility. So all of that is to say, I believe it is very, very possible that the Zunesha that we see today is in fact the ancient weapon Pluton, a weapon that was fed a mythical zoan devil fruit during the Void Century and sentenced to walk the seas. possibly as punishment for the crime of existence. And ever since then, no one has been able to locate it except for those who are friends with the minx. So that's all for this video, and if you enjoyed, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this every week.